Core 2020 is an admission of failure on Wizards of the Coast's part, but sometimes that's actually a good thing. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. Today we are here for a case study in failure and how it can actually lead to better things. And what we are going to use for this case study are the ley lines, not just the ones from Core 20, but previous iterations as well. I'm shortening the name down. It's supposed to be Core Set 2020. Then I called it Core 2020. Now I called it Core 20. And next I'm going to be C2. And then I'll just be like, anyhow, let's talk about ley lines. Now, let's start with the one ley line that you are probably not familiar with at all. And that is specifically just called ley line. And God, is it not awful? Look at what you get. 1 green, 3 colorless. It's an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. The flavor text says, I can feel the strength of the entire forest. And it's Gerard just reaching up and grabbing some trees. I am a tree god. And then he gets a tiny little bit of power. I can feel the strength of the whole forest. And it's just 1+1/+1 counter. Woo! It's a mighty strong forest. Either way, the artwork to me is hilarious. He's just standing there like, yeah! He looks like he's at an AC/DC concert. Woo! Anyways, it's just so funny to me. A lot of people don't know about this ley line, but we can't discuss ley lines without discussing that ley line. Now, there's one indication that, hey, you know what? Sometimes it's all right to fail and just sweep it under the rug. You don't even need to know that's a ley line because most of us know the ley lines as enchantments that have a special ability across the entire series, and that is if you have the ley line in your starting hand at the beginning of a game of Magic, you can actually put it straight into play. So the ley lines all cost 4 mana, just like, actually, funnily enough, the original ley line. They all cost 4 mana. They all come into play for free if it's in your starting hand, but they have a varied range of abilities. They've actually done essentially 3 different cycles of ley lines, and you can see as you go through each progression of ley lines where they feel they've nailed the design and where they feel that it's lacking. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through each cycle of ley lines and we're gonna point out what was successful and what's a failure. And you'll see it starts with more failure and moves towards less failure. It's an improvement as we move along. So we're going to start out with the original cycle of ley lines. These ones come from Guild Pact. And actually, you know what, before we do that, as an added note, if you didn't know what ley lines are, essentially, originally, the term was coined just as a way to describe the pathways that were direct paths between old villages and things like that. That was originally just what it was meant for. It was just kind of a theory of, oh, we have all these direct paths leading from town to town or major monument to major monument. And it's kind of silly, the rest of it. But anyways, that's how ley lines started. And then it turned into a feng shui kind of power thing where mystics started to believe, oh, these ley lines have genuine power and that's the reason for them. But that's not really the case in the real world. Obviously, we don't have magic in the real world, so ley lines don't have any actual power. It's not like the ley lines run into Stonehenge or gonna create something like all that druid nonsense in real life is silly. But it did lead to the concept of ley lines, and the idea of ley lines is really cool. A ley line is just a line of power that runs across the plane of existence. So there's some places where these lines of power come and you can draw upon the power. And also, it's good to note that Wizards actually indicates in a lot of the artwork that you have 2 lines crossing. That's actually known as a ley node, and that's more powerful because you have intersecting lines that create like a larger nexus of power. So they're called ley nodes or ley nexuses, if you wish to use that terminology. That's also fine. So let's dive in to the Guild Pact ley lines. We've got Layline of the Meek, 2 white, 2 colorless. They're all enchantments, so I won't bother with that part. If Layline of the Meek is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it in play. I'm not going to read that for each one. I'm just reading it for the first one because I went on about ley lines. So, creature tokens get +1/+1. Flavor text where strength and humility converge. And you can see someone who's supposed to be a meek individual with their staff thrust directly into the ley nexus. So that's some all right artwork. I mean, The artwork doesn't, the person in the artwork actually feels really tiny. I suppose maybe that's the angle it's put on to make them seem meek, but it just gives creature tokens +1/+1. And you look at it and you go, eh. I mean, sure, if you start with it in play, that could be pretty nice. It's not the worst, but it's not very exciting. And when you have to pay the full cost for it, it feels fairly weak. And we will find with a lot of these original ley lines, they were fairly weak. They needed to figure out the balancing for them and kind of experiment with the concept. And they didn't want to make things that were free, like too powerful. So I can understand why they held back on it. So Leyline of the Meek is okay to me. Next up, we have the original blue ley line, Layline of Singularity. Now, this is the one that I like the least. 2 blue, 2 colorless, although it could be a tie with other ones as well. 2 blue, 2 colorless. All right, I'm not going to read that part. All non-land permanents are legendary, where renown and solitude converge. So basically, this is just like, hey, if you have 2 grizzly bears, now grizzly bears are legendary and you have to sacrifice one. It's a really weird way of making sure people can only have 1 copy of any permanent in play. It's really not that amazing, especially just to start with in play. It's kind of like, eh. You look at it and go, oh, okay, like this card just kind of says everything's legendary. All right, I guess in like a particular theme deck where I really care about legends, it might be exciting, but it's really underwhelming. The artwork is great though. I really like the artwork with the blue ley lines intersecting, the mage standing there, arms out thrust, kind of basking in the power. It doesn't really tie into the idea of singularity to me. I mean, the ley lines don't really communicate that much about what they do through their art, in all honesty. It's really just, here's some ley lines. And the original one showed people, and we'll see that they abandoned that mainly when they went forward. But I really like the look of the buildings and the background of this art. And the mage does look cool with the blue glowing lines under him and the blue energy blasting out of him. But this, again, is a fairly underwhelming card and doesn't feel worth it, either for putting it out at the beginning for free, it's kind of like, eh, or putting it out later for 4 mana feels really expensive. After that, we've got the green ley line. This one's not too bad, 2 green, 2 colorless, and this one says, creature spells can't be countered, where sovereignty and flesh converge. And you can actually see this is a super intense nexus here. You have 6 ley lines running together, or 3 running across it, depending on how you want to look at it. But either way, this has the most, I believe out of all of the ley lines, this one may have the most, at least from the original set, it's the one with the most actual ley lines in the artwork. And you can see with that much like power at their disposal, they're able to go, creatures can't be countered. And you can just see the green permeating out everywhere. It's just like everything. It's obviously a very like washed out green artwork. The artwork is, it's okay to me. It's all right. You've got the mage sitting there manipulating a like energy up out of the nexus. So that looks all right. But I mean, in terms of your opponents not being able to counter your spells, that's pretty deep, and not pretty deep, I should say pretty good. And the flavor text is interesting as well, where sovereignty and flesh converge, where it's like, my creatures rule, so you cannot counter them. I dig the flavor behind it. And I like sometimes when they do things with artwork where they like kind of flavor the entire artwork with the color of it, but it didn't work as well with the green ley line for me. Now moving on to what is tied for the worst ley line. This might actually be worse than Layline of Singularity, actually, because at least Layline of Singularity can fit into some kind of theme decks. Leyline of Lightning is trash. 2 red and 2 colorless, and whenever you play a spell, you can pay 1 mana. If you do, Leyline of Lightning deals 1 damage to target player, where Storm and Spellcraft converge. Now, the artwork is awesome, actually. I like the idea of just being in the back alley of a city and just finding this nexus where you can pull up lightning energy into, and the guy's got lightning arcing up into his hands. It's got some heavy wizard feel, and honestly, with the darkness and the encroaching in the barrels, it almost makes you feel like you're hidden there in the alley, kind of peeking out of them in like a sense of danger. I like it. It's got this closed, cramped kind of feel in the artwork. So the artwork is great, but the card itself is garbage. You have to slow yourself down and cast your spells more slowly, essentially, because you're going to have to wait to get more mana to cast all your spells. And all it lets you do is an extra damage to a player. It can't even hit a creature. It's so weak. They didn't want to make it too strong, and as a result, this one ended up way too weak. I would have to rank this the absolute worst of the original 5 ley lines. So what happened next? Well, after Guild Pact, we didn't have ley lines for a while, for a considerable while. And then M11 rolled around and they were like, you know what, we're going to bring back ley lines, but we're going to mix it up. We're going to ditch the ones that we think are failures and we're going to keep the ones that we think are successes. So let's see how many of these ley lines they decided to keep. Starting out with, oh, actually, sorry, my apologies. I forgot about Ley Line of the Void, which is absolutely hilarious to do. I'm sure people are already screaming at the screen. What do you mean that's all the ley lines, you idiot? What about the best, most expensive one that everybody wants? How could I forget Ley Line of the Void? It is a massive oversight. 2 black, 2 colorless. This one is the most important of all the ley lines. This is big money chaka-laka right here. So if a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard, remove it from the game instead. So this card shuts down anything that plays graveyard style, where it's like you play in a graveyard deck, will get wrecked because you're not going to have a graveyard to operate from. And the fact that you can start with this in play actually means, in terms of modern, it's a lovely sideboard card. You can have it in your sideboard and use it in your deck if you're not even playing black. You can just be like, whoop, oh, I get it in my starting hand. Boom, your entire strategy shut down. This card's so powerful against graveyard strategies that mulliganing your hand over and over just to start with the Ley Line of the Void to just give you the win is actually worth it. This ley line may as well be colorless. In most cases, it's all about getting to play it for free. This is the most powerful ley line ever made. All right, like hands down, this is the most powerful one, truthfully. So the flavor text says where treachery and oblivion converge, and that's beautiful. That flavor text is absolutely beautiful. The idea of the treachery and oblivion converging together to create non-existence. There you go, oblivion. So this one here, the artwork is, I don't know, for some reason the way the ley lines arc up onto the platform kind of bother me. Because it, like, ley lines are supposed to arc through the earth, it feels like, and it just makes this artwork feel different compared to the other ley lines. And in all honesty, it has more of a mystical kind of hooray for me feel. Like, this doesn't feel like somebody's being removed from the game, right? Or anything like that. It just feels like a black wizard drawing in their power. Maybe not even a black wizard, honestly. You could put this art on other colors too. So I mean, I do like the purple feel of it. I mean, that's a nice color, but overall, the artwork doesn't do it for me. The power level of the card's through the roof. So as I hastily said before, that ends the guild pack cycle. Now let's take a look at the next set and see what they decided to keep. I might have given you a little hint about the card we just talked about. Next up, we're going to start with M11 now, and that's Ley Line of Sanctity. That's what we're starting with here. So this one is 2 white, 2 colorless, and you can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. Sweet Lady Marmalade, is that amazing against certain strategies. Are you playing a burn deck? Well, I got bad news for you. You can be the target of your burn spells. How about that? How you like me now, punk? That part of the card is pretty solid, honestly, I gotta say. And considering that's the only part of the card, it really makes it solid. Starting with this in play, okay, feels great, feels amazing. You can't target me from the start. But also, paying 4 mana for this effect feels perfectly fine, man. This is like an Ivory Mask, honestly. They made Ivory Mask back in the day. This is an Ivory Mask that you can either pay regular cost for, or boom, you can go, let's cheap this one out. Either way, fantastic. The artwork's really interesting to me. It's like a field of roses at nighttime with all this, it's got this dark blue feel to it. But the ley line is so powerful that even though there's one line, it's actually converging with an amount of power you would expect at a node or a nexus. So I like this card overall. This is not a bad ley line. You look at this one and you don't go, oh, this sucks. You go, yes, yes, I like this. This is good times. Moving on. What did they decide to do with the blue ley line? Well, they scrapped the previous blue ley line just like they scrapped the previous white ley line. And instead, we got Ley Line of Anticipation. 2 blue, 2 colors. You may cast non-land cards as though they had flash. That's amazing. That means you can cast your spells at instant speed regardless of what they are. And you can start with this on the board, or you can pay 4 for it. And guess what? Both feel fantastic. So this is definitely a nice step up in terms of blue ley lines. The artwork's awesome as well. It's got like a tropical beach combined with like a tropical storm feel to it, where the ley line is actually down through the water. So you would wonder how deep down does the ley line would actually be, like however low the bottom of the water is. If it's an ocean, then down at the depths of the ocean would be the ley line. And that energy is actually blasting up out of it. I love the contrast of the bright blue against the whole like dark and red, orangey kind of sunset sky. I really like the artwork of Leyline of Anticipation a great deal, honestly. And it's a huge step up. This card is fantastic. So I'm cool with this one too. Let's see what happened with the next Leyline. Did they scrap the green Leyline? They sure did, but they blew it this time, boys. 2 green, 2 colorless. Leyline of Vitality. Creatures you control get +0/+1. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain a life. That's garbage. That's garbage. Honestly. This feels like an enchantment you could get for like 2 mana. Honestly. Seriously. I mean, when you look at things like a Johnny's Welcome that exists nowadays, you can see why this is a trash fire. This is a Garbo card right here, honestly. The artwork is cool. I like seeing the ley line that's running up into the boles of a tree. You could just see this massive tree and the energy pouring into it, which really gives the idea that this ley line transmits vital force. So the art's a real win, honestly. This art is better than the previous Ley Lines art, but the card itself is awful. This card is just awful. This one's actually the worst of the 5 Ley Lines in the second set of Ley Lines, okay? Hands down, this is the worst of those ones. After that, did they keep the red one? Nope, no they did not. 2 red, 2 colors for Ley Line of Punishment this time. Now this one says, players can't gain life, damage can't be prevented. This is all right. This is a big step up from the previous red Ley Line. Being able to pay 1 extra and do 1 damage to a target is nothing compared to this, honestly. The fact that you can start with this right on the board and your opponent can't gain life, that's a pretty feels good kind of moment if your opponent's playing life gain. And the damage can't be prevented, again, is good if you're dealing with things where that matters. This is a more situational Ley Line though, so this isn't an auto-include into every kind of red build, obviously. The artwork is pretty funky. You have a mountain with a ley line running through it, and you can see this like almost, it looks like it would almost be pulsing like node of energy right there in the heart of it, all the redness around it. And I like the way that the mountain just feels like it has this inner glow, and you can see it too with like the purpling at the top of it. It's really evocative artwork, but the card itself is just okay. It's definitely a step up from the previous red one, but also it's all right. Moving on, what do we get for black? Surprise, surprise! Leyline of the Void made it. It was the only ley line from the first cycle that was considered good enough to get a reprint in M11. Now, obviously it does the same thing, just exiles stuff from going to your opponent's graveyards. It's crazy that it's just your opponent's graveyards too. It doesn't actually affect your own graveyard. That blows my mind. Anyways, this new artwork, it doesn't actually feel like it's showing like a ley line, really? It's just got some, it almost looks like there's like purple pools of energy that are evaporating up into the sky. I don't know if that's because this was repurposed artwork and was never meant to be a ley line. Maybe they were originally going to use the original Ley Lines artwork with it, but decided, wait, we don't want to have one piece of artwork where there's somebody in it and the rest be landscapes. Like, I don't know why they chose this to be ley line artwork. I do know that I actually really like it. It feels like it would be great artwork for a swamp, truthfully. It feels very alive. Like when you look at it, you can feel kind of the dampness of the air there. And you can see like the trees feel like they're all kind of mossy and maybe half rotted, but there's a lot of verdant looking grass in the background. This looks like an okay place to maybe go camping. I don't know. But it's interesting that you've got like the green lushness in the back, and then in the front, you've got like the dark purple, and it looks like the trees have been like rotting away there. So that's the influence of the ley line, I guess. So if you can accept the fact that the ley line looks like puddles, then I mean, at least the flavor of the rotting of the area around it does give that ley line of the void concept, where it's like void energies are sapping out, and look what they're doing to this natural vegetation compared to the vegetation in the back. It's got a good contrast that way. So I like that, honestly, I like it. And you can see Ley Line of the Void powerful enough to make it, right? So that only leaves one cycle to go, and that is the Core 2020 cycle. So some of you have been keeping up with spoilers. We already know who made it and who didn't. But for the rest of you, let's find out. First of all, we'll look at the white ley line. What did they do? Well, they brought back Layline of Sanctity. They changed up the artwork. This is like a Nexus style one, and it's got a Stonehenge kind of feel to it, actually. That's what it makes you think of when you look at it with the little stone monuments there. It's got Stonehenge with these ley lines look thick and powerful with a bunch of other colors swirling around them. And I really like the green, like it's just got this weird curve to the plane and everything. It's a weird perspective that we're being given, but the card itself ends up being very striking as a result. So I like it. I like it very much. So what did they do with the blue one? Well, they decided Ley Line of Anticipation actually was good enough, and boom, here we go. They changed up the artwork. Again, we're looking at another Nexus style intersection of two ley lines. This artwork is very nice. Honestly, the whole, like, you've got your beaches and your little island chunks with a bunch of greenery growing on them. It looks like it would be a nice place to vacation. It definitely looks calmer than the previous Ley Line of Anticipation where it looked all stormy, but also I don't like it as much. I like the previous one of Anticipation where it was just like anticipating that storm rolling in or whatever. It really felt like it. This is just like some cool looking landscape. So it's still a cool card, and obviously they've decided now that the white one's good enough, the blue one's good enough to keep going with it. Well, what about, what do we have next? Well, what did we look at last time? We looked at the green one next, so let's look at green. Oh, green got yourself an upgrade there. 2 green, 2 colorless, and this is Ley Line of Abundance. So, same deal, obviously you can put it out for free if you start with it. Whenever you tap a creature for a mana, add an additional green mana, and 8 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. As a green player, I'm underwhelmed by this. The fact that it'll make your Llanowars crank at a bit more mana or other guys, I mean, I guess depending on the deck you're playing, if you go outside of standard, maybe it's a little more exciting. But as I'm underwhelmed by this one, in all honesty. Now, that's just my initial impression. This thing could turn out to be a beast and just wreck in standard for all I know. But I look at it and I just kind of go, you guys missed again with this one. I don't expect this one to stick around. I expect it to get kicked out of the ley line cycle by the next iteration. The artwork, on the other hand, absolutely gorgeous. I love this closed-in forest with the ring of stones. It feels like a mystical portal almost, really, to me. I really dig it. It's got like a fairy, otherworldly kind of vibe to it. And it's crazy how many trees are like, it feels like you've got this open space in the middle with energy flowing out and then a bunch of trees all like closed in around it, feeding off that life energy. And it kind of lends to that abundance concept because there's an absolute abundance of energy and trees within the artwork. So the artwork's an absolute win for me. The card itself is underwhelming. The red ley line. Did they keep the red ley line? No, they did not, good sir. They switched it up to Layline of Combustion. Whenever you and or at least one permanent you control become the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, Layline of Combustion deals 2 damage to that player. It actually feels a little bit weird as a red player to be doing damage to someone in retaliation for them doing something to you. Things like Impatience make more sense to me, where like Impatience is an enchantment that'll damage you if you haven't done something, like do something. The whole red sort of like, okay, you targeted me, I'm gonna sting you back. Like it feels more like a white punishment, truthfully. Like white has that punishment style. But overall, I mean, if you get targeted or something you have gets targeted, your opponent takes 2 damage. That's not too shabby if you're going with a really aggressive start with a bunch of little like donks, and I don't know. I mean, it feels like it has potential. This one feels like it might be good enough to stick around, but it also feels like it might not be. So we'll see how it goes. The artwork is great. I love how dark it is here, but the ley lines here that are intersecting creates a nexus that's so potent with red mana that it literally looks like the nexus itself is on fire and flames are raising up, but they're like spiritual flames. I just love how much it stands out against the darkness. Like imagine coming across this ley line in the middle of the night, just this spiritual energy just blasting upwards. Very, very cool. We'll see if it has what it takes to actually stay in the ley line congregation. You know what I'm saying? And that leaves one more, the black one. Can you guess? Did Leyline of the Void make it again? Of course it did. The card's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So, I mean, you don't need to know what it does. You already know what it does. We've seen it twice. So let's take a look at the third one's artwork. This is all right, man. You've got big blasts of energy from the underworld. It's kind of being shown in what's mostly a barren area, although there is life kind of around the center of the standing stone. So it doesn't really actually give a void feel to it. That like purple energy coalescing up there. None of this has like a malevolent or like decay style feel to it where it leads to oblivion. It's just like a ley nexus somewhere in the dark. But it does look nice, don't get me wrong. It's just kind of, doesn't really transmit the concept in a spectacular way. But at the same time, nobody's going to care, because this is a ley line of the void, and people are super stoked about this reprint. Honestly, that and the white ley line were very highly sought after, and actually even the blue ley line too, were all cards that people were like, oh, you know, like they're ones that went up significantly in value, up into like the $20 range, all the way up to maybe $60 when it comes to void of, when it comes to the void one. And so having these reprints lets people snag them up way cheaper, and which is nice. And obviously those ones are the successes. So it's interesting to see how they started out with 5 ley lines. 4 of them weren't good enough, they had to scrap them. And then they came back, and then it turns out only 2 needed to be replaced after that because the other ones felt good enough. So hopefully we'll get to the point where we can have 5 really solid ley lines that everybody is excited when they reprint. Because right now we've got 3 ley lines everyone's excited about reprinting and 2 unknown variables. So we'll have to see where we go from here. But it shows that failure can lead to success and better design as they do different iterations and explore the same kind of concept in one way with the getting to put it into play for free, but attaching different things based on the color and trying to find that sweet spot of design. So at this point, they've succeeded with at least 60% of the ley lines, which is a passing grade. So they're no longer a failure. Speaking of people who aren't failures, it's time to roll the golden scroll. These are people who have my back on Patreon or through channel memberships. Thank you very much for supporting my work. It means a lot to me. Everybody, I say thanks for coming and hanging out. And for now, I'm history, baby.